Welcome everyone to our LinkedIn Live Sustainability in the CIO's office. So as we wait for folks to join and click on the links and click on their calendar notifications, if folks could start telling us where they're dialing in from and talking about what they're expecting or hoping to hear from this event, that would be great. I'm personally dialing in from Brooklyn, New York, and it's gloomy here, so I'm hoping that this event is going to be part of brightening my day. My name is Rita Soni, and I am Principal Analyst for Impact Sourcing and Sustainability Research at Everest Group. And I'm really excited about today's LinkedIn Live because we have a special guest who's joined us because of a book that he's published. So, and I'm also joined by our partner, Jimit Arora. So as we're waiting for folks to put into chat where it is that they're from and what they expect or hope to hear from our esteemed guest, I'd love for Jimit and Nicholas to give us a quick introduction of themselves and where they're joining in from, since we can't type into the chat.
All right, so good afternoon, everyone, or good morning. Niklas Sundberg, Senior Vice President and CIO for Global Solutions Division at ASSA ABLOY. Also author of the book, Sustainable IT Playbook for Technology Leaders. Been in IT pretty much my whole life, and before I joined ASSA ABLOY 5.5 years ago, I was a managing partner at Gartner, and I've spent my life in advisory and IT management roles, so to say. So looking forward to this session today.
Lovely, and thanks, Niklas. Thanks, Rita. Jimit Arora. I'm a partner with Everest Group based in Dallas, Texas. I've been with Everest Group for the last 17 years and then working with organizations on a variety of transformational issues across their IT estate, sourcing estate, and GBS estates. And Niklas, thanks so much for joining us today. You're very modest in your introduction about the book, right? It is the #1 new release for IT and sustainability on Amazon.com right now.
Yes, that's correct. So
brilliant, brilliant.
You're right. I'm a bit modest, that's for sure.
You are very modest, and you know, just while we wait for folks to join in. And, while we kind of wait for folks to join in, the thing that struck me, we kind of started this conversation about 3 months ago at an event where we were talking about net zero. And I think it's been really interesting to see your whole commitment to this space. And we're looking to unpack some of that and what a CIO can do, right? To really enable this change is going to be important. So really glad to have you with us today.
Thank you guys for the introductions. And yes, Nicholas, congratulations on that status of new releases. So I would love to hear a little bit more about where folks are dialing in from. We have one person dialing in from Sofia, Bulgaria, a place I would love to visit. So as part of us doing this work in sustainability, for our ESG related events, we celebrate this theme by partnering with an organization called OneTreePlanted.org. They're a nonprofit that's focused on reforestation. And while we know that within the plethora of things that could be done within the sustainability arena, tree planting is maybe low-hanging fruit, we're excited about the partnership as a way to engage with you, our audience that's on the call. So any comment that you put in, any reaction that you give us, any love that you send our way, or question marks, or maybe just letting us know that those are interesting ideas, whether you agree or disagree, all of that will result in getting a tree planted on your behalf. The last time we did this, we were able to plant 173 trees on behalf of the event participants, which I thought was a pretty great number. But it would be great for this event to beat that. So nope, I'm not very competitive. No, I do love competition. So again, thank you for for the people that have already commented in chat. But I'd love to hear more questions as well as comments. So to get us started to thinking about sustainability, we wanted to share something that, as Jim had mentioned, where we met Niklas, we started talking about the zerotracker.net and looking across the world on who's doing what in terms of their net zero commitment. So if we can pull up our slide on what's happening across the world. And this is specifically, sorry, we need to go back a couple of slides. That's a preview of what's coming later. Sorry, technical glitches here. I'm going to talk to you what it is that's on that slide. We have a slide that shows net zero commitments on what years commitments are being made. And we wanted to know from our audience, back one more. We wanted to know from our audience, what is their company's net zero target and where they're standing in terms of meeting those commitments. We do think that they are real and aggressive and really want to kind of make a commentary on that. So anyone in the audience, if you can share, that would be great. Jimit, what do you think about this, sort of the industries that are covered and sort of the range of dates and where we think this net zero conversation is going?
And I think what's interesting is that, you know, the whole net zero movement in some ways started. Companies had and have a lot of time to kind of, thank you, we have that right now, you know, a lot of time to kind of achieve that. And there's some that are looking out 28 years all the way through 2050, right? And this is just a sample of the companies. This is not an exhaustive list. I know last time I presented this slide, we got into a lot of trouble about folks who weren't there. And this was, I think, just looking at some US companies only, right? Part of Fortune 500 in some ways. And what's interesting is that you already have a handful of companies that have made progress and have delivered on some of these commitments, right? So if you look at some of the tech-first companies, Workday, Salesforce, Netflix, right? So you see those, but then you also see some traditional companies like Goodyear, right? Humana, Floor, which is more on the engineering side. So it's if we see what's happening now, it's not kind of restricted to the world of technology. We're seeing people who are taking strides early and quickly and being lead steers. But then you also see across the stack a wide number of industries that have made commitments all the way, you know, through 2050. We do see a big uptick coming at that 2030 mark, where some very common names that you would identify, like, you know, IBM, Facebook, Alphabet, VMware, Disney. It's a cross section of industries, and to us, I think that's really interesting. And as you project forward, our hope is that some of these timelines can come in sooner. But fundamentally, you know, this is a very real set of commitments that people are making, and in some cases aggressive. In some cases, I would argue maybe not as aggressive, right? And hopefully the companies can learn from each other. So Niklas, what's been your view? I know you've tracked this space as well. You've been looking at this. I was curious to understand from your vantage point where you see this going.
Yeah, I think one important thing is also to recognize that is this the net zero commitment in terms of when you're actually in your operations and your scope 3, you are net zero, or are you actually using offsets as well? I think that is something that's also a bit dangerous to get into if you are offsetting your business with offsets, because as more and more companies will start utilizing these, the price on these offsets is going to rise, obviously, in the demand for those. So it's going to be a challenge if you're not actually setting your business up for success to make the transition to actually be net zero and not to do the offset. I think it's great to see some of the tech companies making some bold commitments, but also to be very transparent that they don't have all the answers. They have made this bold commitment, but they also say that, well, we haven't figured out exactly how our road to success or how we're actually going to reach net zero. So there's still some question marks in these commitments, but I think it's very good progress on the early adopters in the 2030 space, so to say.
Yeah, and Niklas, I know you've done a lot of research on this, and you're a researcher and advisor for a long period of time, so I know it's part of your DNA. One of the questions that's come in is, hey, for the folks that said they were going to accomplish this in 2021, 2022, what's the report card looking like, right? So have we seen some of them achieve what they said they would achieve, or is this more promises and not real action yet?
Well, I would say that it remains to be seen. I think both Workday and Salesforce, for example, if we take those as two examples, they've been very publicly communicating that they are net zero. They are net zero operations. If they use offsets or not, I think that is not fully disclosed. Because I think also with the access to renewable energy, for example, in the United States, is maybe a bit problematic to say that you are completely net zero, but I think that's what they have publicly communicated, at least today.
And I was looking at a blog that Workday put out, and at least based on their 2020 projections, the emissions in some ways are being, so they've got verified emission reductions and renewable electricity that's kind of offsetting their emissions through electricity, business travel, etc. So at least as I look through it, it doesn't seem like it's a pure offset story to get to the answer, but more of a, hey, we are taking some real efforts, setting the stage to get things done. Yes. Right? I think Salesforce also has a similar story, right? In fact, again, I'm reading something up about where they were about a year ago. This is zero residual emissions across the value chain, 100% renewable energy. That's been their storyline. And what they're also trying to do is to work across all three scopes. So I do think at least the first two, the tech lead steers, aren't really doing a cop-out and doing this the way it should be done.
Yes. I can agree with that. And I think also if you review their code of conduct for their suppliers, they're also putting very fierce demands on their suppliers to also meet their sort of bold targets. So I think they are definitely walking the talk, like you say.
Yep.
Thanks, guys. So I'm really excited. We're getting a lot more commentary. I think everyone's motivated by this tree planting thing and want to let us know where they're dialing in from, as well as putting some more questions and comments on in the chat. Thank you everyone for dialing in from across the globe, from Denny, from Florida, from Connecticut, and New Jersey, my neighbor. So, adding to this question about the net zero, whether they've actually reached the net zero targets, the same person, Lamis, has asked if we can talk about what does net zero look like specifically in a technology company. I guess going forward, thinking about that not being manufacturing or with physical goods. So, Niklas, do you want to take that question?
Yes, sure. So when we talk about net zero, we really talk about three categories. We talk about scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. Scope 1 is really your direct emissions that you have within your company, within your operations. Then scope 2 is your indirect emission, but it's everything that you procure in terms of energy, heating, cooling that you use for, it could be for a data center, but it could also be for an office center, office building, or a manufacturing plant, for example. So that's really what sort of sits within your four walls of your company. Then the scope 3 becomes a bit more complicated, because here we're actually talking about what you consume in your supply chain network when you are buying raw materials or you're producing goods to be able to sell to your end customers. But you're also talking about your downstream in terms of your products and services that you deliver as a company into your market space. So there are really two facets to scope 3 that you need to be mindful of, both your supply chain network, but also your downstream impact on your products and services.
Got it. So I think we've got some questions that are coming in that are actually addressed a little bit later in our presentation. So I think let's move back to the couple of slides that we have, which actually, thankfully, not like a webinar. We don't have 100 slides, just a few. So, I think what's interesting about this assessment that you've done, Niklas, is thinking about a model company and what it means to look at specifically how carbon emissions look for a technology company. And you've given us this model example. So can you walk us through this? And as Niklas is walking us through this, I'm going to ask great questions that are coming up in the chat, but also I'd like to hear from you, where are your companies in terms of their net zero targets? What are the targets they've set? And where do you have concerns, or where do you think there are major opportunities from reaching those net zero targets?
Yeah. Great. So if we take the top half of this slide, and what I really wanted to do with this, like Rita was saying, this is based on a model company. This is 10,000 employees, but this is also based on a successful company that is growing roughly with 10% employees per year. So it's not a flat linear model in terms of this is your baseline and this is where you start reducing from. This is also to sort of encompass the growth of the company. And you can also obviously look at this from different perspectives. Here we're looking from a reporting perspective and to establish a baseline. If you are a software engineer, for example, and you are concerned about the code that you're developing, then you want to have instant feedback, you want to have real-time data on this, then I would recommend a different type of metric to do that, to actually have a direct connection to your account in the cloud when you're developing something. But here is really to establish sort of the overall baseline for a company. And here we look at 4 key categories. And there is also opportunities to be a bit more granular and also look at your network. But then you need to have a lot more data points in terms of your different network nodes. You need to know what type of network nodes is running on renewable energy, what type of carbon intensity they're running on. So that's actually out of scope for this. But what I wanted to show with this model is really that you can calculate your baseline like I've done here, looking at your existing estate, what you have in your data center or what you have in your cloud. So here I would recommend that you assess what you have in your local data centers, or it can be a local server room, server farm, what you have in your global data centers, for example. Or if you are a newly started company, for example, then you probably will take a cloud-first approach and everything will be in the cloud. But maybe you have not assessed in terms of, am I running my cloud in low carbon mode, for example? Have I really made an assessment on what is my CO2 footprint on my cloud state? The second part to this is IT hardware. And this is really what you are buying as a company. And this becomes a bit more complex because you need to take into account both embodied carbon. And when we said embodied carbon is something that you actually is inheriting from the provider you're buying your computer equipment from, for example. It could be HP or Dell. So 80% when you buy a laptop is actually produced, the emissions is produced in the manufacturing phase and the sourcing phase. So when you get an asset in your hand, it could be a smartphone or a laptop or a desktop, then 80% of the CO2 has already been spent in the manufacturing phase of this. So what you are consuming throughout the life cycle of a product between 4 to 3 years, 3 to 4 years, depending on the asset that you have, then this is including both your embodied carbon from your vendor. The third category is to assess the energy. And especially where I'm dialing in from in Europe, we have a bit of energy crisis today. We have energy costs spiking, going through the roof. So it's quite important to actually assess how can we improve the management of energy. And here there are actually quite good tools on the market already to, if you have your assets connected to the Global Active Directory, Microsoft Intune or Microsoft SCCM, you can actually get out these data points and you can actually start assessing in terms of how much energy are we consuming from our assets. And what you will see some interesting facts there, I'm sure, when you start assessing your estate, and you will see some direct ways to be able to optimize your assets. In the last chapter here, or the last category, is IT asset disposition. And this is really an emerging field within IT or information technology, where we need to start introducing more circularity in terms of how we manage our IT assets. So when our phones, laptops, desktops, and so forth become end of use, I would recommend you work with a reputable partner that can sort of take care of your assets once they have reached an end of use or end of life. And they can hopefully refurbish it, they can repurpose it, or in worst case, they can recycle it. What really scares me about this today is that we are consuming roughly 57 million ton of e-waste per year. So this is equivalent to the Great Chinese Wall in terms of weight, or 126,000 jumbo jets in the air with e-waste. And this is expected to grow to roughly 70 or 75 million ton by 2030. So we need to start introducing a lot more circularity when it comes to IT asset disposition. It doesn't mean that you need to own your assets for 6 years, for example, because obviously that is going to reduce your carbon footprint. For every additional year that you keep your laptop or your smartphone, you will be able to reduce your carbon footprint by 25%. But I would also say that maybe there's an opportunity in terms of residual value to actually sell the asset after 3 or 4 years to an IT asset disposition vendor, and they can resell it and repurpose it in sort of a second hand, and to keep the asset alive for maybe 6 or even 9 years, so to say.
I should be in the middle of that, Nicholas, but yep. Our friend on chat, Trinda, said that that's a scary metaphor. Love the metaphor, but think it's definitely scary to think about the Great Wall of China level of e-waste, and I think that certainly is scary. And I think in your description of this model company, Stacy McGrath and Rajendra had asked about KPIs related to the CIO and what they should be focused on, and I think we've covered at least one side of the emissions, specifically on IT assets, and where that looks. Jimit, you were chatting with me about Goodyear. What were your thoughts there?
No, I think there was some questions about how a manufacturing company is setting out such aggressive targets, and I think that's something need to go back and investigate, right, and whether or not something like that is feasible. I will say that I also saw a question around what leading financial firms are doing, and then I think this was from Deepak. Hey, what are some recent initiatives undertaken by the leading financial firms like JP Morgan, DBS? And I'll kind of put something in here, but Niklas, maybe you can comment on, if you're aware, which of the offset strategies in some ways, or which of the emission reduction strategies are working for them. Most of the big banks are part of the Net Zero Banking Alliance, right? Which is aiming, which is over 100 banks globally trying to get to the target of net zero by 2050. But part of what they're really trying to do in the near term is to reduce Scope 1, Scope 2 emissions by about 40%. So JP Morgan, as an example, has made that commitment that by 2030, they want to reduce Scope 1, Scope 2 by 40%, right? So when it comes to the lower side of your chart, Niklas, how can the IT organization contribute to that?
Yes. So I think once you have your baseline, like we have on the top one, I think it's important to, and here, depending on the industry you're in, depending on the environment that you have, maybe you are a cloud first company today, or maybe you have everything on premise. You're going to have different levers to be able to pull them. What I wanted to show with this is really that this is a 10-year journey from 2022, where you have 7,600 tons of CO2. And by 2031, you're actually going to be at 2/3 in terms of your reduction of CO2 emissions. And here I have shown a few examples in terms of how you can pull different levers. And the data center and cloud, the easiest thing is obviously to use your resources more efficiently, but then also to move your workloads to low carbon mode or low carbon places, for example, where you have access to renewable energy. So one example in the US we see is that both Ontario in Canada and also Quebec, they have a lot of access to renewable energy. So there are data centers being built quite a bit in Quebec, just because they have a lot of hydro, for example. So that's a great lever to use. When it comes to IT hardware, I think there are other levers to use, maybe not to change the approach in terms of how you procure hardware and to change the life cycle from maybe 3 to 4 years or even 5 years. But then you introduce modularity, where you have spare parts to be able to replace batteries, memory, SD-RAM, and so forth. But then also if you're using professional service partners, for example, most of them already have a laptop. So maybe you should just provision them with a shell device as a service in the cloud. I think that's also something that we see can reduce CO2 emissions quite dramatically, because then you're actually taking off the hardware off the table and you're running it on server side. Really energy management is definitely a great lever to be able to pull, both by choosing products that are more energy efficient, either E-Star or EPEAT or TCO certified products. Then you will be able to classify them as fairly energy efficient. But then also what we have seen globally when we look at our whole estate is that 30% of our IT equipment is not being turned off at night. So maybe that's a question for the audience. How many is actually turning off their laptops at night? Or because most people work 8 to 10 hours a day, but then if you don't turn it off and just idling, it is going to consume energy. And we saw that number is 30% across our company globally.
Yeah, I have to put my hand up of not turning my laptop off. I certainly put it to sleep, but I definitely don't turn it off. That's good insight, I think. So I want to keep the conversation moving a little bit, and get into, I think we've already started getting into the what of what it is that folks can be focused on. And we had a preview of the 3 work streams a little earlier. So let's get into the weeds of the 3 work streams. And as you absorb this slide, folks in the audience, we're also going to put a special offer to those that are on the call with us. To anyone attending this live LinkedIn Live session, we're offering an important tool for procurement teams and providers of services. This is a sustainability RFP tool. It's been developed based on all the conversations we're having across the industry on what we should be thinking about in terms of ESG criteria within procurement, whether you're actually providing the services or you're actually procuring the services. So please do click on the link and download that tool as a special offer. So Jim, I know you've seen this slide.
Yeah.
And have some interesting insights into footprint, handprint, heartprint.
Yeah, I'd say, and Niklas, this was, to me, this was a really good framing of how you wanted us to consume the story, right? And we've always thought of the carbon footprint of organizations. And I think on the previous page, as well as even here in that first row, you're talking about the footprint. But then what I think was really important were the other 2 prints that you've called out in terms of the handprint and the heartprint, right? Yes. Especially the heartprint one, you know, we've spoken earlier about how we are trying to make sustainability and purpose one of the key pillars of technology, right? So as you think about that and where we are trying to take the organization, what caused you to come up with this framework? And if you could share a bit more about it, especially the handprint and heartprint, that would be really valuable.
No, but as I worked through a model, I wanted to have something that sort of encapsulates the whole ESG when we talk about environment, social, and governance issues. So it's quite, you can get stuck in only talking about the environmental issues and the loss of biodiversity and so forth. But I think it's equally important to make sure that we have good social conditions. Where are our goods being manufactured? How well are the working conditions? What type of chemicals, hazardous substances are being used in the manufacturing, but also within the products itself? I think also diversity, equity, and inclusion is something that's extremely important to encapsulate, should not be overlooked. So I think the heartprint is equally important to this, to be able to develop a sustainable company that it sort of encompasses a number of key areas within ESG. And then in terms of where maybe the focus lies between different continents, I think in Europe, we are definitely more focused on the footprint and the handprint. And there's legislation coming with the EU taxonomy or the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which is coming into effect January 2024, which means that every company above 500 employees needs to start reporting on their scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. So, but I think in the US, I think the tech for good or the heartprint is equally important. And that's also a lot that you hear from a lot of companies focusing on, because in the US, the social contract it's a bit different from Europe. Yep. As a company in the US, you are expected to do good in your communities. You are supposed to be a bit of safety net for your communities and so forth. In Europe, we have a little bit different social structure in terms of how that social contract is between the public and the private sector. So I think the conversation is a little bit different, but I wanted to sort of have a framework which is also easy to remember in terms of your footprint, your heartprint, and your handprint.
Just so Niklas, I continue to be fascinated by this, and what I really like both about what we were discussing before and this one, and I think we were talking about this even in your book, it's very pragmatic it's very action oriented, and you can apply some of this today, right? And I think I can see some of that in the chat as well. I know there's a few questions I want to get to, but one thing I did want to ask, when you talk about organizational enablement in that hard print, and as you think about the next generation of talent workers that are coming into IT, how important has been this focus on sustainability been to attract and retain new talent?
I think it's absolutely critical for any organization. I think what we are seeing is that people want to work for a purposeful organization. They want to work for a company that takes a stance, to have a clear purpose of where they are going. And I think also post-COVID, I think everybody is experiencing the squeeze of the talent war, or the war for talent. So to be able to show that we are a purpose-driven company, or that you are a purpose-driven company, is extremely important. But then also for employees to be able to make sustainable choices within that company is equally important. To be able to engage them, to be able to educate them, to enable them to make sustainable choices, for example. A simple things on the topic of IT is to offer refurbished smartphones in our IT service portal, where it actually states that this is a carbon neutral phone because you're actually buying a refurbished. It's a great quality, it's 2 years warranty, but it's still a refurbished phone. And so far we see that the uptake is quite positive so far on these type of small initiatives where you can enable employees to make sustainable choices.
Awesome. Yeah.
I was going to say, I love that example. And then I also like the example that we got from Christine Gonzalez-Wirtz about Walmart allowing their vendors to purchase green energy from their providers. So, that's crisscrossing the scopes as well, which I think is innovative and sort of thinking outside the box, as well as tapping into that younger generation of, what are the things that matter to each of those, whether as customers or as employees. So love those examples.
Hey, Rita, I know you said that you are competitive, and I don't know where we are doing on the 173 trees here, but just another reminder, right, as we enter the last few minutes, right, we are going to be planting a tree for every comment, reaction, engagement that you do, even if it's to call me mean names. We'll do that as well. Maybe that's the best way to get more trees planted. And if you want, you can also specify which region, which geography you want this done. It's on onetreeplanted.org, which is a nonprofit focused on global reforestation. So please keep the engagement going, right? I think we have a few more questions come in, and I think there was one that I found most interesting, and Niklas, I wanted your point of view on this. It's from Stacy McGrath Gifford. Do you see buying power of companies impacting how vendors, manufacturers are reporting and addressing the embedded carbon in assets, right? And while we kind of bring that on the screen, I recall seeing from you on LinkedIn, similar to the chart we had on net zero, you'd put out the different tech companies, right? And you said, hey, as a CIO, I'm going to hold my companies accountable to where they are on their net zero journey. Yes. So if you take your experience as a tech buyer, and then Stacy's question, how do you see these two worlds converging?
Yeah, I think there's important to talk about this, because I think it's obviously what you can do as a company, but also seeing it from the other end when you talk to vendors. The more companies start actually asking for these type of requirements, the more we standardize the format of these requirements, the more the companies is actually going to start moving in the right direction. So I think also it's important to get involved in organizations that have a similar purpose. SustainableIT.org is one of them. The Green Software Foundation is another one that's available, where you can share these type of requirements. So it's important to start doing it, obviously within the four walls of your own company, but I also think it's important to collaborate across to come up with these requirements, because then we have the opportunity to change the whole industry when we start putting these requirements on the vendors. Because like you said early in the talk, Jim, there are definitely some vendors in the 2024, 2045 or 2050 that I think also should have some higher ambitions, because they are also operating within the tech industry, and they should be able to move forward the target to net zero.
Wonderful. Yeah, no, I think that I really like what you've done with that. And I just also wanted to kind of go back, and this is something, as we think about the data center and cloud stack, at this point, as you see across the public cloud ecosystem, are you finding that all the options are equally green, or are some more green than others?
Yeah, I think that's a challenge. I've looked at obviously some of the major global hyperscalers. I think it's important to read the fine print, because some hyperscalers, they only include scope 2, so only the energy that they emit, for example, or the heating and the cooling. But then other hyperscalers, they're actually including their embodied carbon, the servers that they are buying and that they are refurbishing or recycling on a regular basis. I think right now we don't have a full standard in terms of comparing all the hyperscalers across the board. So it's also important to be able to read the fine print and see what are they actually providing, because they are providing their own tools for this. But I think it's also important to be able to have an outside-in perspective and also have a sort of an impartial view on their footprint, so to say.
Got it.
I think there's some more Q&A that we want to do, but before we get into that, we've referenced Niklas's book a few times, but I think we want to go ahead and share a little more detail about Niklas's book, and I think we've already heard in our commentary that folks have gone and purchased the book. So Niklas, again, congratulations on this accomplishment. And I really think of this as a treatise almost. It's not a read from page 1 all the way to page 418. It's a little bit more of, it's more like a handbook or a playbook, as you've said in the title. Yeah. So I thought it would be great to hear what inspired you to put all of this knowledge into the book, and just give us the background and the backdrop of where what inspired this.
Yeah. So I think it really started with my own company where I'm working today. We made a commitment to science-based targets to halve our footprint by 2030. We made that commitment back in October of 2020, so roughly 2 years ago. And as a result of that, we were also tasked from all the functions to come up with our own sustainability strategy. And I think what I quickly realized was that there are great research if you dig into a specific topic. For example, data center and cloud, or IT hardware, or energy management. But there wasn't really something that collectively brought everything together. And especially in my role as a CIO, I have a wide scope of areas to handle. I have a limited time to be able to address all of these. So what really inspired me to write this was to provide a pragmatic book, which you can start addressing the key issues that you are thinking about, but then also to reference to other sources that are a lot more detailed in terms of how you can optimize a data center fully. How can you run in a more sustainable way, improve cooling, heating, and so forth. But my real ambition was to provide a tool for technology leaders and future technology leaders to be able to address these type of key issues going forward. And I felt that there was a knowledge gap in the market where when you start dissecting these things. They are not that hard. It's actually more about thinking about it, embedding sustainability by design in everything you do. This is similar to cybersecurity, for example. 15 years ago, maybe cybersecurity was not top of mind for everybody. Today, we do security by design in everything we do, because that's really what we are forced to do to be able to stay on top of things. Same thing, what I'm hoping that within the next few years, we will have sustainability by design in everything we do. This should be part of our DNA towards a sustainable future.
Words to live by, sustainability by design. I love that. We've got a question on SEC norms, on how do we think that the CIO's office can help lead some of that regulation. I think it's a great question, and I think generally SEC and other regulations, as they continue to evolve and change, I know we're trying to keep up with all of those changes. Recently put an interesting perspective on ESG and banking out there, specifically about regulation. But I think it's a good question on, as these regulations evolve, what is it that we think how can the CIO's office take the lead?
And I'll offer one perspective, and then Niklas, love to hear what you are doing, especially given Europe has been ahead of the curve here in some shape and form, right? Traditionally, all things SEC was part of the CFO's realm, right? The CFO had all of the disclosure data, the financial data that was required. I think with this one, a lot of the carbon data. So again, the CIOs are responsible for the data estate of the company going forward, right? There is a lot of conversation around the whole carbon estate, as you pointed out, right? And a lot of the reporting in some ways around what the SEC is asking for, as this moves away from being voluntary to a requirement.
Yes.
Our thesis is that the CIOs will play probably the most important role in getting this estate across, given that they are not only the custodians of the data, but also in some ways some of the biggest influencers of how you're driving impact around the sustainability stack, right? And there's some schools of thought out there that the CIOs will have to really partner with the CFOs to make sure you're compliant with the SEC. What's your view, especially having seen this in Europe for a while?
I think first of all, I think it's a great question, because what we've seen is obviously SEC coming out with this recommendation, proposing a rule for carbon disclosure, and that came out in March 21st, 2022. So I think it's great that this is coming for all publicly listed companies in the US. So I think it's both from a reporting perspective, but then also to manage risk. Risk is something intangible that we talk about, and maybe we hope that it doesn't materialize. But I think also this past summer, we've seen a number of risks materializing. We see Lake Mead, we see shortages of water, for example, in the US. We've seen in Pakistan, 30 million people has been dislocated from their homes due to flooding. 2.3 billion trees has been burnt up in the US. So I think not only from a reporting perspective can the CIO play an important role, but then also to manage the different types of risks that is not only on the horizon 5 years from now, they are actually here, and we can provide a lot better data and analytics to analyze where would the next flood, where would the next wildfire take place, what is the risk of my different locations where I have office locations, manufacturing sites, and so forth. Access to energy, water, obviously.
Yeah, that's great. And I think, we just got a great comment from Sabra saying that all the 17 SDGs are embedded in the CIO's role. And I think that's, hinting to exactly what you said. And even as we do what we're doing here, trying to contribute to the tree losses through even fun, engaging activities like onetreeplanted.org. I also think that it's interesting to think about. I think data has been sort of one of the largest conundrums that we hear about in the industry. But on the other hand, you also said that it's quote unquote easy. So we know the information we need, we know the actions we need to take, but it's more about synchronizing and making things compatible, etc. So I think that's really, really interesting and helpful. I'm going to put out one more call. We just have a few more minutes to the top of the hour. If any further questions are there for Nicholas, for Jimit, for me, and really excited that we've had so much engagement and so many folks dialing in from across industries and across the globe. Yeah, Jimit, do you have some more questions or comments?
No, I think I did want to kind of remind everyone in terms of what it is that we're trying to do. There's a tree for every comment. Hey, last couple of minutes, you might want to rack up that count and also specify which geography you probably want that tree to go in. But no, I think again, Niklas, thanks so much for all of this engagement. Thanks for putting a spotlight in terms of this very important issue and making it seem not as something that needs to be done by 2050 or even 2030. It's something we need to start now.
Yeah.
And we are quite, it's been our honor in some ways, our privilege to be able to work and see how you've done this, how you've really made it very practical. I think the last 3 chapters of the book are really helpful in creating that roadmap, and it is a playbook. So thank you for doing that. It's a great service that I would say you've done to the community and to the industry. And we want to continue the dialogue, and I'm guessing that you're also going to leave the doors open for others who want to learn from you and benefit from that dialogue. So thanks so much for that.
Thank you very much. Very happy to be here and to share my knowledge.
Lovely. Rita, closing thoughts?
Closing thoughts. I think, well, I would love to hear a few more claps or thumbs up for the conversation, because that is adding to our tree planting. But also, I think, as you said, the treaties is a handbook, and I think that's the most important thing, that we're all collaborating for this bigger, broader goal. I like to talk about co-opetition in this space, that we've got competitors collaborating for this greater good, and I think that's exactly what we see in Nicholas's book. Yeah, I think that's the big takeaway. I did neglect at the beginning of this. I apologize. I think one of the best parts of doing LinkedIn Lives is that's a space. LinkedIn is a space that we're all using for a variety to stay connected. So please do send LinkedIn connection requests to all 3 of us, but even more importantly to each other. All of you that have commented in the chat, you'll see as attendees that you can connect with each other. You can follow Everest Group. You can, there's just a variety of ways to sort of stay connected, and we're really excited about this platform as a medium to have these conversations. And yeah, look forward to more feedback on what it is that we're doing and where we're going. And I think we just posted a link to what it is we're doing across our firm vis-a-vis sustainability. And that's emerging, right? It's evolving as needs arise, as progress is made, and even as regulations come in. So I encourage you to check out those links that we've sent, and also to check out bookshop.org for Nicholas's book. It's also available on Amazon. Yeah, I think that's it. And I'm going to ask my colleague to give me a latest number on where we're at as far as tree planting. The last number I saw does not beat our previous tree planting. So maybe in these last few seconds, we'll get a few more. I think we could, like, Jim, if you want to do like a drum roll or something to get to a good number. See that? Just a few seconds added a 20 tree addition.
So I will say, and this is something which Niklas and I had joked about at our previous event. We talk about being superheroes. In this case, when you're talking about net zero, hey, don't be a superhero, be a super zero. On this journey to be a super zero, right? Let's try to see if we can get more reactions and comments. Hey, at the end of the day, this isn't about likes. This isn't a YouTube channel which gets us ad money. We're doing this primarily for the environment, and I think we're probably inching close to 150 now, and maybe with that we'll keep the effort going. But Niklas, thank you once again. Have a great afternoon, and thanks everyone for joining in from all parts of the world.
Thanks everyone.
Continue the conversation on LinkedIn.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.